I'm not an icebreaker, but okay. So as Ben said, I'm Chris Fromm. I've actually been here in DevOps, and I'm a DevOps convert. So I say that because when I found myself wanting to find a new job, I was anymore. So that was I joined a company and they have an Exchange server, or they need equipment purchasing, or they have data centers. And I had the opportunity at two of my last engagements to do some cloud microservice DevOps transitions. And if you'd seen some of my previous talks, some opportunities to build completely automated full stack pipelines. And basically, when faced with the decision of, do I want to go back to kind of, doing that hardware role, so to speak, or stay in the creative space of building solutions for DevOps, I said, I don't want to go back to what I used to do. So essentially, what I used to do is build data centers. It would take 6 weeks or 6 months. Now I write some code and I do that in 2.5 minutes. And you just can't, there's too much power there. You can't go back from that. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different. So I've seen a lot of DevOps talks. I've gone to a lot of conferences, and people, including myself, do the big orchestrations, pipelines. They show you all of this Chef and Terraform, and that does all kinds of amazing things, and it looks really cool. But I actually wrote this presentation for UTD students. So I said, what do I really want to talk about that hopefully will resonate? And so it's this. And I have to define this because it may not make sense to everybody. So what is environmental variables at scale? So environmental variables. I'm not talking about like the path variable in your Etsy environment or in your control panel, wherever you go with that, right? I'm also not talking about your carbon footprint and its effect on our environment, right? So what I'm talking about is basically application configuration that has to change per environment. So settings that have to change from dev to QA to stage to production. So here's some examples. Database connection strings, external API or web service URL references, usernames, God forbid, passwords. There's a really good HashiCorp product called Vault, but that's a different conversation. Sometimes you see error debug flags, and then feature flags. This is very common things. A lot of people refer to them as environment-specific configuration. But what I've typically seen is you have a properties file, for instance, if it's Java, right? And in that properties file, there might be 500 lines of properties, but like 15 of those are the ones that actually change. The rest of them are just in there as a place to put the setting, right? But the ones that have to change are important. And they're really important to DevOps and a lot of the things like microservices and immutability and portability. So I've seen lots of conversations or situations or plans or strategies where people are talking about pushing to containers or pushing to immutability or pushing to portability, and they're talking Docker, Kubernetes, and Chef. But then when you kind of look through their stuff, they still have all these like impossible. Microservices is going to be very hard, and then containers and portability just as hard. So environmental variables, they're handled a couple of different. At least what I've seen. I know there's other ways, but in Java I've seen you have a properties file for each environment, and then when Maven runs, it goes and it picks up the right environment for whatever setting your POM is defined to, right? In .NET, it's sort of similar, but not really at all. You define a web.config and it has static values, and then you define a transform or an XSLT or XML or whatever it is to go through and replace the static values with what you want them to be in each environment. But each one essentially happened at compile time, right? So if you wanted to do portability, this isn't going to work because you compiled an artifact and that artifact now is for QA or that artifact is for dev. You can't take it to prod because the stakes are wrong, right? So we have to address this, and I want to talk about basically how that can be done. But just to talk about them a little bit further. So it boils down to essentially the same thing. So you have all of these sets. So in Dev, you have a DB username, you have DB password, you have API URLs, a database host IPs, maybe a RabbitMQ IPs, feature flags, and then you have them change per environment. And they seem okay at first. They may be even a little bit efficient. I have a QA file, I have a stage file, I have a prod file, no problem, right? But what happens if you have multiple environments? So now we have the same things, but now we have the same application deployed in QA1, QA2, QA3, QA4, QA5, QA6. I did 8 of them. So now somebody, whether you're the app developer or you're the DevOps engineers,